welcome to this episode of Seasoned Scholar, Season 2. We have with us one of the very remarkable worker and stalwart in the field of antimicrobial resistance, David W. Graham. He is Professor of Ecosystem Engineering at the School of Engineering, Newcastle University, Tyne, UK. And he has been professor not only in the US, but also been a esteemed guest at IIT Delhi, of course, and his journey is going to be unfold very soon. He has been involved in real projects in several countries, several South African countries, Asian countries, including India, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Thailand. So pretty, it seems that Asian countries, Singapore, are the one that, of course, hottest spot for antimicrobial in one way or other. But his work in Europe, Denmark, also in UK, USA, has been, I mean, he is well distributed through his work. And that's why rightly has been identified as the expert panel for United Nations Environmental Program on AMR in the environment. And he is the co-lead author of the report that is going to be released in February this year. And he is identified WHO expert, and there are several more interesting things will unfold. So there are several other awards. He is very good person to go with. Not only what is going on in the field of AMR, but also to learn that how to do research of public impact and how to become a global researcher. Some of the highlight that I would like to know or ask from Professor is these things. He has been also very active publishing thing, and so that's why involved in various editorial and reviewing roles. He has been associate editor in one of the very highly reputed journal of frontiers in microbiology for last 10 years. For 10 years, 2010 to 2019. And of course, he has been peer regular reviewer for Nature, Science, JACS, ESNT, and so many top journals weight or value his recommendation, and why not? And Professor David, today I just looked at your Google Scholar. You are one sort of 10,000 citations. So welcome to this program, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you, Manish, for inviting me. As you'll find out, my background is kind of a interesting hodgepodge. So how I got where I am is basically it's a journey that most people haven't done, but it shows you that the journey doesn't matter. Maybe the journey's the process. So we'll talk about it.
Yes. So this is going to be the 3-part, so first part will be entirely dedicated to your journey, and so it's a kind of digital biography of David W. Graham, and so anytime your follower can open and see how did you become this legend, and the second part will be about your advice to academician, researcher, and so on and so forth. And third part will be, again, getting into light, knowing you more about your liking or disliking, and so on and so forth. So this is 3 quick the segments. So let's just start with segment 1. Here we wish that you tell us, yes, how did you start? And since very beginning, since you remember your days that as a child, that how you were as a child, how was atmosphere at home? How was it like the contribution of family members, especially the impression of your parents, teachers? So in one go, you can reach up to the graduation, and then I will take up the next question.
So are you a graduation from university or graduation from elementary school?
Yeah, this is right question again, because in India we say graduation means bachelor, so you can reach up to the bachelor.
Okay, well, my background is a bit odd because I never actually ever planned on being an academic, and I grew up in the prairies part of Canada and in Saskatchewan, and my mother came from a farm family, and my dad, though, was a RAF pilot in World War II, and they met when he was training to go back to the Battle of Britain in the 1940s, and they got married after knowing each other for about 2 weeks, and because he was going to go back to the war, and there was a 70% chance he wasn't going to live. So they, as it turned out, he crashed out because of 2 crashes as a pilot. And he went back to university during the war and became an architect and planner, stepping from Northern Ireland and then moving to Canada, where I was born. So I grew up, my dad was director of planning for Northern Saskatchewan, which is the province that I was growing up in. So he was quite academic and very cerebral. And my mother was extremely practical. And actually, even though she only went to school until she was 13, and because she had to leave because her mother got unwell and she had to mind her sisters, her younger sisters, she was always very sharp mathematically. And it was always a shame she never went farther for herself. So I grew up in an environment where everybody was inquisitive, and I actually was a bit of a black sheep in the family, not because I behaved badly, but I was completely obsessed with sports, and I wasn't very academic. I played baseball, hockey, American football, you name it, and that was my priority when I was in elementary school and all the way through high school. And I was a pretty good student. I was one of those people that I was too vain to not do well, but I didn't work hard enough to do very well. And so I was a pragmatist. And so if I found that I was doing a little bit less well, I would just work harder and do much better on the next exam or the next test or whatever that allowed me to do better. But basically my priority ever since I was 16, from when I was 16 to 21, was playing baseball. And I was aspiring to be a professional baseball player, and I was actually quite good. But I discovered once I started at the upper semi-pro professional level that even though you're good when you're 16, when you deal with other people who are really truly going to be professionals, you're not as good as you think you are. And so what I did was I was still playing baseball when I entered university. And my brother was in engineering, my older brother. And because I really hadn't thought much about it, I decided I'd just go in engineering because it was just going to be temporary, because I was going to be a professional baseball player. And this is when I was 18. And but as it turned out, by the time I was 20 to 21, I'd sort of seen the light a bit. And I still hadn't really started taking academics very seriously, but I was progressing. I mean, the thing is, every single year I was in engineering school, I did okay, and not outstanding, but okay, until my 4th year. I was in a 5-year program. And this was about the time when I stopped playing baseball super seriously. I took a course in water, and that was related to water. I had actually thought of switching to medicine and going into medicine instead, because I was now starting to take the rest of my life seriously. And I was looking at things that I could do. And I took a class in water, and all of a sudden I just sort of felt being in university was a good thing now. And ended up getting my degree. This is at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, because our family had moved to Vancouver. And at that point, I I sort of was at a crossroads, and I didn't know quite what I was going to do. And so that's sort of when I started to take academics a little bit more seriously. But I basically was somebody who still liked to play games. I played golf, I played tennis, I still play baseball. And for the sake of not having to do a real job, I decided to take a master's. And it was in water and wastewater engineering, mostly related to landfills and leachate waste treatment. That was what my research was.
Yeah. So here there is a, just before we go to that part after, so you are basically an Irish or from Canada?
I'm Canadian.
You are Canadian.
Yeah,
so,
my parents, my parents were, my mother's Canadian, my father was British, and they met in Canada and then immigrated back to Canada. My older brother was born in Ireland, and I was born in Canada.
Okay. Wow, nice. It is a marriage of two lands. So that is, and very fair that your brother born in UK, so it is very natural that you should born there. So, I mean, second thing about is that you said something, and there I would like you to elaborate a little bit, that you said that when you are, we grow and then we realize that we are not good enough. What do you mean by that?
Well, what you find is that as as we go through, when we're a child, we're given an opportunity to do everything. And I was very lucky. My parents were really supportive. And you start off thinking that you are good at everything. Most children are not, they don't doubt themselves. And I was probably more so than most children. But what I learned, and it was sort of developing a little bit of wisdom, was that if you want to be the best, that certain things are there that make you the best at whatever you do. And in baseball, I was very good baseball hitter, but my eyes weren't quite good enough. I could hit, but if the ball moved a tiny bit more than my eyes could deal with, I just wasn't quite good enough. And it was like, I didn't know that until I started playing against professionals.
Yes.
And so you don't know how good you really are until you find out what good is. And what I did was I learned what good was and what good needed to be if you were going to be a professional baseball player. And what I realized was, even though I was good, I wasn't good enough. And it's sort of black and white. There's not a gray thing when it comes to something that's physical like that. And to be honest, there's elements of that in almost anything you might pursue. There's in some things it's kind of black and white. And,
actually, that is why that was a very remarkable word, and that's why I wanted to revisit, because this has that element, and this is really a lot of essence. So I already got one for this conversation, that you don't know how good you are until you know what is good. So this is a quote unquote, and very nice. I mean, we think we are great, but we don't know what is great and how much great is great. So
how good do you have to be good? And good is relative. And one of the things that I've always found is, and this sounds a little bit arrogant, but I think people that get into your or my shoes, people don't realize how much hard work it is. And how hard it is to be, in quotes, good. Being good isn't just luck, and it's sometimes some of it's genetics, some of it's pig-headedness, some of it's there's all different things that make you more versus less successful at what you're trying to do. But when it comes to some things, there are absolute limits to which you just cannot get over. So if you want to be a mathematician, you better be good at mathematics. If you want to be a baseball player, you better have really, really good eyes. And so, but people who get to the place where we are largely deserve it. And it's partly related to having some of those intrinsic skills that allow you to be able to do what you do. But some of it's much more intangible than you say have to be a baseball player. It's how do you deal with very nebulous problems? How do you deal with uncertainty? How do you deal with being wrong? There's lots of things that you have to deal with in our world. And it's that resilience that maybe might be the reason why you're good. In other words, the resilience is the thing that is the thing that makes you, in quotes, good at what you do. And I actually think when it comes to academia, that probably is among the main traits that you need to have.
Here, just two things is very interesting for me, and I ask my guests some childhood memories. I mean, and something that change you, or in a way like, oh, okay, maybe you can stress a little bit and think that, well, that was a turning point. I know that you have already told that two turning point already, that opting civil engineering, opting for the water, and then of course the landfill, and then the rest is the history. But until then, what kind of any such turning point is coming?
Well, there are, I wouldn't say there's at least before I was 18, there was sort of like a black and white thing that happened, but there were things that influenced the way I was. I was a real idealist, even though I wasn't that focused on school. I was really idealistic of almost everything, to a fault, really. And one thing that always I think about now is sitting with my grandfather, who was a medic in the First World War. And he was, to me, he was a hero. He was one of these people that nobody even knew existed, but he was a hero. He was saving people's lives. He was doing things that were beyond what you should expect someone to have to do. Because he would tell me about things he did when he was a medic in the field in the war. And I always think about that. It's something I think about more often than you expect, because I was probably 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, sitting in his room talking to him. And I felt so proud of him. And that it's sort of, it's part of my drive is that we should be doing things of greater value. And maybe that was, I wouldn't say he inspired me to be that way, because I think I was that way, but I was really proud of the fact that he was. And my father also was incredible in terms of doing what was necessary. It was small heroic acts that were altruistically valuable for the good of other people rather than themselves. And those were the things that were more important relative to me. And it's sort of, we can go into, this is something that we can maybe talk about later. Yeah. But part of the reason why I'm so driven by having impact, if whatever I do, it's got to have value. It's got to really have value. If I wasn't doing things of value, I wouldn't do them. And I think that comes from a pretty good core value system, which came from my family. So it's not really a single turning point. It's sort of a very, very good role models and hearing about heroic things that my father and my grandfather did, primarily during the war, to be honest. So
yeah, I mean, this is you. Actually, next question was that what motivated you the most, or what influenced you the most, and you, in certain ways, have already replied it. and the righteousness, and then the grandfather effect. And also you told about your mom, who is really good at math, and also the environment were such that you could be, and you were very sporting, and I can tell you that that sportingness is still there. Still there, that no, that fighting attitude has been there, even if you are scientist. I have seen you little bit far from, and I can tell you that that sportsmanship is still there in you.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, I think the thing, when I got my master's degree, I sort of, first, I actually ended up working in Latin America, working as an orderly in a hospital, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was going to go, I said I was going to go back to medical school. But I decided against it. However, that what I learned was that as I was in industry, and I worked as an engineer in industry, I missed some of the, I didn't find doing something financially competitively satisfying. But what I did do once I started working, when I was getting closer to the possibility of going back and get a PhD, was I was seeing how much fun it would be to solve more complex intellectual puzzles, because I always love playing games, and I think that's that sports mentality, as you said, is part of what makes probably it's both what drives what I care about. It's not, but I hope it's not at the expense of people. I mean, I see things of great value that people like me are lucky enough to potentially help with, and it's just not moral for us to not do what we can. But there also is a competitive streak in there. It's the desire to do something as well as possible, and be as solve the problem in the most complete and exact way. And that's part of what comes from trying to be the best at a sport.
Yeah.
Same mentality.
Same mentality. So here, now you can please tell us about from your master landfill site that you were talking about. But just before, you can start with like how does it start with water? Oh, did you really loved it in one go? Because my just little bit my story is that I always like to analyze water, but soil I was hating, and the sediment I was hating, because a lot of extraction needs to be done. You have to play with a lot of acids, strong acids and extractants. But eventually I did my PhD on sediment and soil. So how was your story?
Well, part of one of the things I did as a side relative to the other sports I did was I was a beach nut. I went to the beach. I was a beach bum, and I surfed. I was sort of very much water oriented. We always would go to the lake or the river. That was where our holidays would be, and I just find water. It just makes me feel good. Just to be by water, I love flowing water. I like static water. And it's just, I don't know what it is. I actually, and I think it just roots.
Which month you are born?
April.
Generally, okay. That's trying to find whether you are water sign. But
no, I'm not. But I've got a Pisces rising or something like that. One of my old girlfriends told me that. But I found water, and I still do. I have still, my feelings is not the same. I do like soil. I do like mountains. I love going to the Arctic. But I think water is what makes me feel the warmest. And it's sort of, in some respects, it's kind of dumb luck that that's how I feel, because for many years when I was a student, I took engineering. I mean, it was math and physics and chemistry. And in my engineering degree, we didn't do anything to do with biology.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I started working as an engineer, as a consultant, I started getting more involved in water projects, but also the ecological and biological consequences of what we discovered relative to primarily environmental pollution in water and soil systems. And with that, I realized that maybe for most of my life, I hadn't been focusing on what was the real thing importance, and that was the biological systems. And that was a lot of the reason why I went back to do my PhD. So I had no background at all. I didn't even take a biology class in high school. And now I do genetics. And it was just the process of passing through work primarily on water, soil, and some cultural projects as an engineer, and finding really ultimately it coming down to what is the effect of whatever you were doing on the biological systems, the biology of your system, whether it's human, whether it's wildlife, whether it's plants. And that's what I learned in my engineering career before I went back for my PhD, was that this feeling I had for biology, for water, it sort of translated more into biology, but I hadn't taken a class, and so it's I can't say why, except it is what it is. And so how I ended up in genetics, we can talk about that in a second, because that's got a similar sort of twist to it, because it wasn't planned.
Okay, this is really, I mean, what is influencing me most or more here at this point of time is the passion or the decoding that you are doing, and then relating with your work and eventually the growth or this one. So thank you very much for staying the scientist while you are describing your journey. So that is one point I wanted to make. At this, now the second point that I was thinking that you told already that what you have done, why you went for PhD. There is one question that I will come in the later part of the career, which is I have noted. Here, I just want to know that how did you choose topic and your supervisor and the place of the institute where you should do PhD from?
No, that's actually a good question, because I had got my master's and bachelor's at the University of British Columbia, and I wasn't completely sure what I was going to do. I didn't really see myself being an engineer. And so after I got my master's, I went and worked as a volunteer in a hospital in the Dominican Republic in Latin America. And I came back from having done that, and a friend of mine had got a job working for an environmental impact assessment company in Vancouver. And they needed somebody to step in and help them with a particular project. And I wasn't really doing anything. And so I went in and joined them, ended up working for them for 7 years. And so during that period, though, I really enjoyed it for the first 2 or 3 years, because I was doing projects around the world. And we primarily studied fisheries and forestry impact projects. And as I did more of that work, first, I got a little bit bored by the business side. I got bored by the fact that in the business world, you rarely get to finish something completely. You're always finished whenever the person stops paying you. I didn't like that very much. I never felt I completed anything. And as it turned out, my boss at the time felt that I was, he knew I was restless, and he sort of suspected I was going to go on somewhere. And he said a friend of his desperately needed somebody to do some lecturing at one of the local community colleges. And so when I was working as an engineer, I started teaching when I had my master's hydraulics classes and fluid mechanics. And slowly I migrated to deciding that, I felt now maybe I could be an academic, but I was still working as an engineer in industry at the same time. But I also was kind of jaded by the business side, and I applied to go into philosophy at Oxford. And so I was going to leave engineering completely. This is when I was about 27. And I got accepted. But then they said they couldn't start me for a year. And I was just too impatient. I wanted to get going. And I went on a holiday to Arizona in the southern United States, which is where all the the professional team prepare for the season, for spring training. And because I was teaching hydraulics, and University of Arizona's got one of the top hydrogeology programs in the world, I went to the university, and through a series of coincidental conversations, no planning at all, they offered me a scholarship by the end of the day. So within a day of having no intention whatsoever and being basically in town because I was going to baseball game, I was offered a scholarship to go to the University of Arizona. So it was more, I needed a change, and it was one of the best groups in the world. And they obviously saw something in me that nobody else had seen in my academic career, because I'd become I sort of was bridging philosophy and science and engineering in terms of the way I was thinking. And I was trying to connect everything together into real solutions rather than just technical geeky solutions. And so I started at Arizona. I decided to go, and I went to Arizona. In Arizona, you don't go with an advisor. You go and you spend a term going through what's called a qualifier term. And that's when you find out whether anybody wants you and whether you want to stay. So you're sort of a PhD student, but you're not. And then at the end of that term, you have a series of exams, and then you end up choosing an advisor or having an advisor choose you. And what I discovered, the reason why they offered me the scholarship so fast was, two of the professors at the university did consulting work in the pulp and paper industry. And the biggest one in the world is Canada. So they offered me the scholarship because I was Canadian, because it was the way they were going to be able to do business in Canada. And they'd offered me twice as much than what the other students were being offered, because they told me. So I got there thinking I had this great deal. I was getting this great salary. I found out when I got there, they wanted me to fly back to Canada every 2 weeks to act as a consultant for them. And I had a bit of a tiff with them, quit. And one of the other professors, though, who was a bit more like me, collared me and said, "Don't go." He said, "Well, I'm leaving. I'm not going to be used. I left industry because I left industry. And I'm not going to be used and be the consulting arm of two guys that want to do business in Canada. That's an insult." And I mean, I wasn't a fool. It was clear that I could do what they needed, and I was a professional and all that. But the bottom line is I didn't want to. And he talked me into staying. His name was Bob Arnold, and he's a great friend and hugely influencing person in my life, because he basically talked to me into not quitting. And he said, "Don't worry, I said, "I don't want to have anything to do with them ever again." And he said, no, I'll shelter you. You can stay. And I say, he just got what's called a Young Presidential Scholarship, which was, I think, $1.5 million. And he could do anything he wanted. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to have 3 PhD students. One's going to do methanogenesis, one's going to do methanotrophic work, and the third one's going to do work to do with sulfur-reducing bacteria." And I was the person he wanted to do the methanotrophic work. So it wasn't anything I planned. But the one other thing I would like to say about Bob, and this is one of the possibly the most influential moment in my academic career, is that Bob bear in mind, I went to Arizona because I was going to do hydrogeology. I was interested in water, and I'd been doing hydrogeology. Bob was a mechanical engineer, got his PhD at Caltech. And but when he went to Caltech as a PhD student, his advisor, literally the first afternoon he met him, said, any intelligent person needs to understand how biological systems function. So Bob got told by his advisor that he had to take medical school biochemistry as a prerequisite for becoming their student.
Wow.
And he did the same thing to me. I said, well, I've never taken a biology class before. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to understand how life works, because we can't solve environmental problems unless you understand the basis of life. And it sort of fit my idealistic side quite nicely, because I was bridging engineering, science, and philosophy already. So I took the biochemistry class, and 2 weeks into the class, I realized the previous 32 years of my life had been a waste of time. And all of a sudden, I became a good student. And I became absolutely obsessed. I mean, absolutely obsessed. I just sucked up anything to do with biology and genetics. And I took class after class after class on all the different biological methods, bearing in mind that I was an engineer. I went there to do mathematical hydrogeology. And so I think this goes back to the sportsman thing, is that I got the bit between my teeth, and if you're going to do it, you're going to do it right. And so within 5 years, we made a number of discoveries, one of which ended up in Science. And because I'd gone back to do the PhD pretty well for the purpose of becoming a professor. I knew I didn't want to do business, and I didn't want to go back to industry. So I had 5 faculty positions offered to me within 3 months of graduating. And I eventually ended up taking a faculty position at the University of Kansas. And so that's how I got into academia.
Wow.
And there was turning points, and this is where it was, with Bob, he always joked about the fact that he was trying to harness me rather than control me. Because I would get so intense about things. I think maybe in a bit too arrogant way at the time, but the bottom line is that I was still intense, and I was focused, and I was loyal. And that was what drove me. And it never really changed. It's really not changed. This is over 30 years ago.
So by what age you completed your PhD?
37.
37. So you were pretty mature, and I know that by that time you were not Bob. Even no one would have been trying to control you because, of course, you went to that choice. Oh, what are the jobs from geographically offered? All were offered from the United States?
My intention always had been to go go back and try and get an academic position in Canada. So I'd gone to the University of Arizona because it was in the hydrogeology world, and also it's true in terms of ecology and medicine. It's very, very good. But the plan had been going back to Canada, but Canada doesn't have that many universities of the quality that I wanted to go to, I was really driven by the research side. Now it was good. Now it was a competitive sport. And so I wanted to go to a place that had a ethos that was going to drive me, and that people had an equivalent drive that I did. And so I interviewed for Rice, University of Houston, University of Minnesota, a number of different universities, and ended up getting a number of offers. But I chose Kansas because first, they had the most number of members of the National Academy of Engineering in their staff. They were very good, despite the fact that it's a university that appears to people on the outside as being a small and local university. It's not relative to water engineering. It was among the best at the time. I believe it's declined since then. But so I went to Kansas for that reason. It was because I couldn't get a job in Canada, and it was because there wasn't any. And so I figured it would be a temporary stepping stone before I went to the next location.
So, I mean, one interesting thing that I have seen is that Kansas, I know pretty well, because I was in Nebraska for 1 year, and I was very feeling bad for central US people who has only land, no seashore and like that. But interestingly, you were a visiting fellow of University of Kassel in 2001. And now, since 2010, you are visiting professor of Kansas University. So how that switch happened, that when you decided that, because I know for a professor, although I also been changing a lot, but established lab and group and instrument and those things. So leaving that and going to somewhere else is really, it is. So after spending quite a bit, I mean, probably 12 years to be precise, 1993 to 2009, you were in the US, and then you went to Newcastle.
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of a non-linear process. I went to Kansas. Within 3 or 4 years of being there, I realized there wasn't nearly as much focus on excellence that I was interested in. And I was starting to look around for other job opportunities. And in 1999, I met with a friend of mine, Bruce Logan, who's a professor at Penn State. He was one of my second advisors, but he's also a close personal friend. He was at Arizona when I was at Arizona, but now he's a chair professor at Penn State. He was hosting it was called an Innovation in Engineering seminar that was at Penn State. And he invited me to come to this because I had started to work on how you use multiple scales of ecosystems to understand biological and engineering processes. So how do you relate a bench to a microcosm, to a mesocosm, to the full scale? And we were among, I think, probably one of the leading groups, and we still are, at the ability of translating based on scale. And he wanted me to talk about that, but he also had the motivation of introducing me to somebody by the name of Ian Head and Tom Curtis, who were people, Ian he knew quite well, but they were both at Newcastle University. And both Ian and Tom had been dabbling with using theoretical ecology as the mathematical basis of describing how engineered biological processes function. I'd be doing the same thing, but I'd been doing it in Kansas. And Ian and Bruce brought us all together. And one evening we went out and drank quite a bit too much. And by the end of the evening, I went back to Kansas and proposed to my wife that we go and take a year sabbatical in Newcastle. And Ian and Tom helped me get money to support us for the trip for a year. Ian and Tom or Bruce didn't realize that my family was, my aunt was from Newcastle, my father was from Newcastle, I had cousins in Newcastle. So it was completely, it was completely coincidental. But we decided that, you know, if we're ever going to get a chance to spend time with that side of my family, let's just do it. And I gave my wife more credit than I deserve for going along with this madcap scheme. And so we went to Newcastle and we really enjoyed it. Went back to the US after the sabbatical. And I was getting a little bit disheartened by the direction in which the political systems were going in the US. This was after 9/11, and there was a direction of politics that I didn't feel comfortable with. And I sort of was getting a real strong desire to go back to Canada. But after having been in the UK, we actually enjoyed it. And Ian and Tom and myself decided in about 2004 that we wrote what was called a people grant. And it was to ostensibly set up a research institute on theoretical ecology and engineering at Newcastle, which I would then come to Newcastle and be the leader of. And so that happened in 2006. And from 2006 to 2009, I was on sabbatical again from Kansas. But this time I was being paid by the EU to work in Newcastle. And 2/3 the way through that, I got offered a chair to stay in Newcastle. And because our children were going to a really good school, we stayed. So I still had friends in Kansas, and I've got close colleagues still there now. And that's
why you are still
that's right. And the people I had closest affinity to were people who were doing geology. So that's the department that I've got affiliation with.
Okay, so until here, just I wish to know that if you have to set a milestones, of course, academic milestones we talked about. We already talked about masters and of course PhD and then the job. But in terms of that was a turning point that make me what I am today. And of course that you can include your marriage also and whatever. So I just open question. Until what you are now, what are the 3-4 milestones that you can recall?
Okay, I'd say there was probably 4 to the present. First was when I went to Kansas, I met a fellow by the name of Jerry Denoyles, who was an experimental ecologist. And he was a real expert in trying to simulate large systems at a mesocosm scale. And he was also kind of entrepreneurial. And he at Kansas, he, through shrewdness and intelligence, he built the biggest mesocosm testing facility at the time in the world. But it's now still amongst the biggest 3. And what that did was it's meeting Jerry was hugely important because it allowed me to because I did my PhD on the genetics of methane oxidation, primarily working with membrane proteins as a biochemist. So I was working at the most micro scale. And then Jerry allowed me to move back to the type of experimental, looking at the world in a bigger picture. But I'd spent 5 years dwelling on detail, finest level of detail from a biological and biochemical perspective. And so that opened me up. I started working with the US EPA because I was kind of pragmatic, but I also had genetics now. I could deal with water projects, everything to do with the water project, chemistry, biology, genetics, ecology, physics, whatever. And then I had Jerry, who had this capacity to do these simulations. And so we pretty well were doing, we were doing a huge amount of risk assessment work for the US EPA for their chemicals program. And I enjoyed that, but was getting a bit bored after, as I tended to. And the next big thing was 9/11. And
so hold on, just Jerry was your postdoc or?
No, Jerry was a professor who was about 10 years older than me.
Same department.
So it was a different department, but he was introduced to me by a friend of a friend. And as it turned out, we met socially and realized we had a lot in common in terms of what we cared about. And so Jerry was a colleague in the evolutionary biology and ecology department at Kansas. I was in engineering. So anyway,
yeah. Go ahead.
That introduced me to working with the US EPA on big projects. Mm-hmm. So the next big event was 9/11. We were in the UK when 9/11 happened. But in July, before that September, myself and a chemist colleague of mine, whose name was Cindy Larive, we'd been doing a lot of aquatic ecotoxicology on pesticides and herbicides. Mm-hmm. And we felt we wanted to do something a bit different. So she had the idea that maybe we should look at the fate of antibiotics in aquatic ecosystems and see whether they were having any ecotoxicological effects. And so we wrote a proposal in that July to the US EPA water program for about $750,000. And it was to study the fluoroquinolone antibiotic series and how they affected aquatic ecosystems. And we were going to study it like we studied atrazine, or one of the herbicides or pesticides that we were working with in our other work. However, when 9/11 happened, we had submitted this program. Now, we had developed a pretty good reputation with the EPA. And a couple of weeks after 9/11 happened, we were contacted by the State Department. And we understand, and we understand that you've submitted a proposal to study the ecotoxicological effects of fluoroquinolones. Mm-hmm. And we were wondering what your plans were. And usually, you know, when it comes to when it comes to these proposals, you find out a year later. But they said, well, we've got a problem. After they did all the security vets to make sure I wasn't subversive, we've got a problem. Is that we're worried about anthrax. And the reason why our proposal was so attractive was because anthrax is treated by ciprofloxacin. And so they were afraid of two things. One is that the water supply would be overloaded with ciprofloxacin. And the second was they were concerned about the biowarfare implications of losing the efficacy of ciprofloxacin as a treatment for anthrax. Because if you remember, you may or may not remember based on your age, but a congressman got an envelope with white powder in it. Mm-hmm. And it became an urban myth that it was anthrax. And it was sort of weaponized anthrax. So within 2 months of submitting this proposal, we had a $750,000 award to study fluoroquinolone antibiotics in water. As it turned out, but we hadn't even thought about resistance. It wasn't even in our proposal. But what we discovered was, as we started studying the ecotoxicological and other effects of Cipro, first we found it didn't have any effect at all. And the second was that but wherever we found Cipro in the environment through natural sources or human sources, we also found resistance. And initially it was just culturing. And I was working with somebody who was a clinical biologist and microbiologist. And I said, you know, why don't we grow some of these things on plates and see if we can find out what they are and who they are and that sort of thing. Bear in mind, at this point, we were very limited in terms of what we could do genetically. But what we discovered was that the issue wasn't the chemical. It could be under some circumstances, but for the most part, the issue was the waste that was carrying the chemical. And it just sort of caused a complete inversion of how we thought. And so that then, because I think in that particular project, we generated 27 manuscripts. Wow. So it was everything we did was new. It was a new discovery. We developed the ways of using qPCR, and ourself and Tom Schmidt, I think, were the two people that first published using qPCR for resistance monitoring. And then Amy Pruden used it in Colorado a couple of years later. And so there was a nest of us that were starting to see that AMR was potentially something important, but we couldn't prove it to anybody. And it was partly because our methods were kind of crude, but we were doing the best we could. And we worked in the animal industry primarily initially, and to do with feedlots and non-therapeutic use of antibiotics. But we gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger on the antibiotics thing. So that's the second thing. The third thing was me getting a postdoc who you may actually even know is Zia Ahmed at IIT Delhi. And I had been observing through the work that we'd been doing in the US, and also we were doing some work in Latin America, particularly in Cuba, that we had made the assumption that how much antibiotics were used was the primary driver of resistance. Now, that is true in relative terms. But what we found was that we were finding elevated levels of resistance in places that didn't use antibiotics. And I started to think that maybe because a lot of the antibiotic resistance work was so Euro-focused, or UK and US focused, that people were missing what might be a bigger problem. And it might not just be the chemical, it might be how the wastes are managed. So we did work in Cuba, and then Zia suggested, well, why don't we, he thought the stuff we were doing, he was working as a postdoc for me in bioenergy production systems. This is after he graduated from IIT Delhi. He's now there as an associate professor. And he said, well, why don't we look at the Ganges? And as another place, because we looked at been studying the Almendares River in Havana. We'd done a couple of other rivers in different other places in the world. But he said, you know, the place where you see the most dramatic differences in water quality is in the Ganges before and after the monsoon and upstream and downstream of where the population increases. And we thought the northern plain and the foothills of the Himalayas would be a really interesting place to understand the role of the human influence and human waste on the transmission of resistance through water. And so that step of moving and starting working in India was my third thing. First, I love India. I love going there, and I miss horribly not being. I usually go there 3 or 4 times a year, but I haven't been there for 3 years.
That is very painful.
I was supposed to be going this month, but for health reasons, I've not been able to go. But I'm going to be going in May, I think, at least I hope so. Anyway, that's the third thing, was when we started working in India. And that then led to working in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Malaysia and Singapore. And that was all rooted, though, in the work that we've been doing with IIT Delhi in primarily in northern India. And the third thing was, but despite all of this stuff we were doing, and in a small world, we were being quite successful, we weren't really having any impact. We were convinced of the value of environmental monitoring for health protection. In 2006, nobody would listen. Absolutely nobody would listen.
Yeah.
And I got so frustrated that I was in my late 50s, early 60s, that, I said, I could either continue doing this and feel like I'm banging my head against the wall, or I can just retire. And it was 2016. I can even tell you when. In 2016, I got 2 emails within 2 days of each other. One was from a representative of Prince Charles.
Wow.
And the other was Randy Singer, who was at the University of Minnesota, who was on the PACARB committee for President Obama on the prevention of spread of antibiotic resistance bacteria. And Randy asked me to be an expert witness in Washington at hearings that were going on to do with drug resistance to develop new policy. And I was invited to attend a one-day workshop that was being held at St. James's Palace and was being hosted by Prince Charles. I only met him for 3 minutes, but the bottom line is it was like all of a sudden, it was like we worked for 30 years like dogs. And within 2 days, it all
made sense.
It all made sense. And it really was, and since there was this particular actual thing was being hosted by Sally Davies, named Sally Davies, who was the chief medical officer for the UK at the time.
And
So
she was Indian?
No, she's British. British. And so she was, and she is still, she's now at Cambridge. She's fortunately for her, she resigned from being the CMO in the UK about a month before COVID.
Oh.
And so she's now at Cambridge, but she's also very influential in the AMR world. And since 2017, her evangelizing and these types of things, like the hearing in Washington, and there was another hearing I wasn't at in Berlin of a similar nature, but in Europe, that there was starting to be some awareness of the wider role of the environment and the spread of resistance, and it was sort of like a new lease of life. And I had all but given up, and I don't give up easy, but I just decided that you know, if life was going to provide me this shot, it was a chance finally to start having some influence. And I think one of my skills is I can write reasonably well. And so I think I probably, maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but I got the reputation of being on time, professional, and I can write. And so I was invited by Wellcome Trust and the US CDC to help write the Wellcome Trust report. I was invited to help write the WHO report for WASH. I'm working on the report for UN Environment Program, which is going to come out in about 3 weeks. And so this combination of all of this experience, working in agriculture in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in developed countries, and you know, I mean, it's one of the advantages of being old, I suppose, is that you get a chance to. But I think one of the things that I think that helped me was that I'm still intense and I'm still driven, not quite as driven as I used to be.
No need. I mean, I can tell you is that I was in the panel when our first meeting of UNEP for AMR report was happening. And I was seeing you that, okay, even moving the cursor and something and making the notes. If I were you, perhaps I would have, okay, do it, I will do later. But you were always active and you always ask and you always, so I would not say that you have slowed down as intensity. Perhaps a professor remains a professor, and with age, to be very true, what happened is that when we are young, we hate olds. And we say that they are not emptying the place, or this committee or that committee. But when we become little more older, then we start hating young ones, that they are not listening, they are not, very proper mannered, and so on and so forth. But I am at the middle of these two.
Yeah.
And what I realize is that experience has no match. And the vastness of knowledge, I think even a professor can be made to live 2 more months. It is worth. Because there was a book. Why I am saying this all is that because the little drop and it says that drop makes the ocean. And same thing happens with the professors' experiences that they, so one book that it was taken some month to finish. And now when this COVID started and I thought, okay, I need to again brush up the virus and all those things. I took that book and 4 hours was enough for me to go through everything. So that is, so then I thought, oh, it means I did gather some information which is not visible to me, but it has been gathered. And in your case, I cannot imagine that how much you must have already gathered. And this experience build up and then show up. So what you can think is, I mean,
it needs certain amount of experience or critical amount of that. So what was fourth turning point?
Well, the fourth one was getting the invitation to do the things with the reception at.
Yeah. So
it was like that light. There was a light bulb that turned on outside of my own world.
So can you summarize these four again for our audience?
First one was meeting Jerry Denoyles and being able to translate
9/11.
9/11. The third one was the recognition that the environment probably and waste were probably more important than anything else relative to AMR spread, and that we wanted to study places where it really mattered, and places like the Ganges, it really matters.
And the fourth is that.
And the fourth is the spark of recognition. So I was, prior to 2016, I was getting invited to give talks, monthly, but it was always environmental schools. After 2016, I was giving talks to medical schools. And it was sort of like there was all of a sudden the veil had been at least partially lowered, so that the people who I felt needed to be driving some of the decisions were now listening to people like me and Ed Top and Amy Pruden and the different people who've been doing this for a long time. Now I think we're still, what's changed since in the last 20 years is that there's a lot of talented people now working on AMR. But I think the one argument in my own favor is that very few people know as much as I do. I may not know I probably don't have your ability with mathematics. I don't have the knowledge of genetics of a bioinformatician. I may not have all these things, but when it comes to the whole package, I suppose I'm kind of practical. And that I can synthesize things, and also I think I'm able to simplify complicated things. So I
read several of articles of yours, and I cannot tell you that I can guess out that how much percentage has been written by you, but I can guess that the progression. I can see when you see that there is a progression in the publication, there is a next level of the question or the problem is being admitted, that itself says there is a journey. If there is a not the evolving of the thoughts and those things, then of course there is a so of course you have done a great service to this. And what had changed after COVID?
In terms of the work, or how
we do in terms of your impact of your work, or recognition of yours, or what has changed?
Okay, that's a really good question. In the first 6 months after COVID became an issue, I probably worked more than I ever had in my entire life. And the reason was that the world had never experienced anything like this before. And the UK government, who I was primarily working for on projects, were looking for anybody who really had expertise in monitoring the environment for health. And so I was asked to be a member of one of the advisory committees for the UK government called the Transmission in the Wider Environment Group, which reported back to the Strategic Advisor Group for Emergencies, which was SAGE. It's called SAGE I
know that.
And so I was on TWEG. And SAGE is a lot better than TWEG in terms of the word, but the bottom line is I was part of the group that was trying to set up advisory risk relative to environmental spread. And what are the pathways? There was pathways to do with water. There's pathways to do with air. And this was when we didn't know anything. And so what happened was during that first 6 months or so, they were calling on people who had some experience, but we never dealt with anything like COVID. And so we were almost having to relearn things or translate things we knew from our previous worlds into the current world. And I think that was where and as it turned out, I think things went relatively well in terms of the advisory work we were doing and the reports we were providing. And it slowly translated from us being active advisors in not just providing guidance to the people who provide guidance to the politicians. We moved more into the development of new ways of doing things, and on the R&D side of environmental surveillance. Now for virus, non-encapsulated virus. Now, and we've had a number of projects on COVID. However, what we've been doing over the last 6 to 9 months is returning back to AMR, because I personally think AMR is a better application of wastewater epidemiology than COVID is. And so we're involved in a number of domestic and international projects that are working on that, trying to take advantage of wastewater monitoring for AMR. So what happened during the pandemic is I worked too hard and I got quite unwell. And I ended up on medical leave for about 3 months to do with 2 moderately serious medical problems. I mean, it was intense, it still is, to be very honest. It's not quite what it was up until about 6 months ago, but last year is kind of a blur, both because of medical issues and working too much. And now it's become a bit more manageable, but I've got 4 governmental contracts right now doing R&D on COVID. One that's looking at how COVID knowledge translates to potential use of other infectious agents, including AMR. However, there's one very, very positive thing from this period. And I think I was talking with a fellow by the name of David Thomas, who is he's the lead of R&D research for a company called Mott MacDonald. We were chatting yesterday afternoon about an AMR project we were interested in. And I'm on what's called the expert advisory group for the rapid response research for the country. And he is an industrial member of the same group. I'm an academic advisor. And we both had the same thought. And the thought was, we wouldn't be talking if it wasn't for COVID. I've met so many talented people that I would have never met, that it would not have been my work. I work with physicians. I work with the person who's responsible for sanitation in hospitals for Scotland. I interact with the chief medical officer, the chief public health officers for a number of different countries, for a number of cities and countries. And the wealth of people and the richness of the number of people in my circle has become so much better. And it's because we were all, they cherry-picked all the people they thought could help. And as it turned out, 95% of them are brilliant. 90% of the 5% of them were chosen, and you can see why. They're outward rather than inward thinkers. And it's been so much fun. I mean, you don't want to take glee out of a disaster, because that's not what I'm meaning, is it?
No, but
for the intellectual challenge and feeling valuable. So because of the work we've done, we've won a number of awards related to the stuff we've done to do with COVID. And in terms of impact, public awareness, we used to, but we haven't done recently, that we've done, there was a point where I was doing TV interviews every week to do with acting as a spokesman for environmental monitoring and talking about risk and that sort of thing. And this sort of hit my wheelhouse, because this ultimately, when I went back to thinking about taking a degree in philosophy at Oxford, my mind never really changed, but I just decided to go to Arizona instead of Oxford. But I also had this philosophical bent, and that is the why. I mean, I keep doing. I formally decided I'm not going to retire ever.
No, I mean, even if you would, I'm just letting you have a breather, because the kind of passion that is there in your every word being talked and being delivered is itself says itself says that what I mean, your name has a very big surname, Graham, and also the but how magnificent you are and how passionate you are. And about the COVID-19, you have given a very different take and very, I mean, heart-touching perspective. And so thank you very much, because yeah, you keep on saying, and this is the one of the interview where I am interrupting the list. Otherwise, of course, I like to say that this is how it is. So this is really heartening to see you as a the researcher, as a human, as a somebody who is so passionate about his science and impact. And the impact is about that has happened in 2016, that somebody at 2016 was thinking that I will retire, and now in down the lane 5 years, struggling with the medical issues, but still saying that I am not going to retire ever. So that is what has happened. The more challenge that nature has provided, or we ourselves have provided, but that has made you more stronger. And I have seen the list of the projects that you are doing, handling them together, all together, even sparing some minutes is so difficult. I've been to your institute, thanks to David Werner and UKD project. I have seen, several times I crossed your office, and because I am a baby AMR expert, so so in that case, I never dared that knock and go and meet.
You should have knocked.
So when I met you in Sri Lanka, then 2019, I think those were the last few trips before this pandemic. Mm-hmm. Then I came to you and I asked that, okay, how about this AMR, or some questions, and you were very sorted. You have been very sorted. Of course, the issues are not very sorted itself, but I would like to go on now a little bit about subject, and then because I am baby and I want to grow, so that's why I will ask you, and then we will go to the advice part. So the first thing is that you said that AMR is going to be a good indicator for wastewater-based epidemiological studies. Can it provide something related to COVID also? I mean, would we be needing both to be done?
Yes.
Or just one indicator is enough?
Oh, no, I think that one of the things we've been looking at that, I'm trying to answer that question for the last 9 months or so. And what we are looking at in one of the projects we're doing right now is simultaneously monitoring 9 different viruses and also sequencing for variants. We're monitoring a suite of different culturable strains, and also monitoring using high throughput qPCR and multiplex qPCR genes for about 400 different genes. Plus we're measuring 110 chemicals. This is Barbara Kaspar-Colden is doing. There's a group of us doing this. So the goal right now is, and this is what we're trying to aspire is, okay, we've used wastewater monitoring for COVID for the last year with some success, not 100%, some success. And the group at DTU Food has got this global monitoring network relative to wastewater, AMR and virus and wastewater, infectious disease and wastewater. But that's in a very, very, it's a wide but not granularly detailed way. What we're trying to do is get to the very grassroots practical thing that we want to do. And what we figure is we probably can get away with 5 to 10 markers. We only have to measure 5 to 10 things, and we'll get some sort of measure of the relative state of community health in a particular place. Now, those measures might vary a little bit from place to place, but the goal, but I think what we've learned in terms of doing the COVID work is that wastewater monitoring isn't good for everything. And the way you do it is different for different targets. So for AMR, you really want to know something about community scale phenomena and longer term and spatial stuff. COVID, it could either be used for an urgent response tool, which is the way it's being primarily used, or it can be used related to community response. And I think the most effective thing we've been doing with viruses actually using wastewater for sequencing for variants. That's been very successful. So to answer your question is that we're trying to put together what will be a toolkit for a country, a city, a government, you know what I mean, that will then allow them and then provide guidance. So you say, okay, you want to monitor AMR, you collect samples at X number of points with such and such a method, certain number of times per year. For COVID, you might do it something completely different because the nature of the information that you get is needed at a different rate. And also the rate at which the signal you're looking for is going to change. Is not going to be, some things are going to be very dynamic and other things aren't going to be very dynamic. And so that's where we're working right now, is to try and first determine which are the things that we can really use wastewater for. And then if you're going to use it, what's it useful for? What is the reason why you're using it? And then to get that value, how often do you measure it and in what way?
Great. I mean, these are the very practical questions. Would you like to add something?
No, that's no. So, and we're making progress. I mean, I think one of the dilemmas that people who are working in that space is that there's so many things happening so fast that we're accumulating knowledge, but we're not sharing it. And it's not because we're not hoarding it, it's because we don't have time. And so how do we write? I mean, I've got paper from incredible stuff we did last March, and we still haven't finished it because we haven't had time to write. And so that's and so what we're doing now in my own group is that we're working, we've got these things that we're doing, but then we're gonna pause for a couple of months.
What do you think about Omicron?
And I mean, we aren't working specifically with Omicron, but we're monitoring systems which include Omicron signals. And I probably know as much as you do in terms of the actual disease. I do talk with epidemiologists who are really studying the infection patterns and that sort of thing. I think Omicron, though right now it's spreading very rapidly. It may be an indicator of the future of COVID-related viruses. It's more transmissible, but slightly less serious when you get it. And that's what most evidence suggests. It doesn't go to your lungs as readily, but you get it more likely. And the thing is, there's an ecological explanation for why that may be the case. And the next variant we might get that takes over is one that is slightly less lethal, but maybe more infective. And the reason is if you think it from the virus's perspective, it's not in the virus's best interest if you die. The virus, the virus wants.
Wow.
The virus wants you to. It's in the virus's best interest to have the host survive. The reason why MERS and SARS-1 didn't spread was because they were too lethal. The people died so soon, and the fatality rate was so high that they could be contained, and in fact the virus had no way of. So what's happened in the past when it comes to infective agents is the first round of the pathogen hitting a public or animal community is the most lethal. But then if it's too lethal, it's gone. If it's slightly lethal, like COVID, it's going to evolve to something that's something somewhat less lethal, because then it can become endemic. And that's what's in the best interest of the virus from a biological perspective. I think it's taken over the Delta just because it's the affinity of its glycoproteins are slightly higher for the receptors and in the lining of the cells. And so if you think about the characteristics of the Omicron as being slightly less lethal and slightly more infective, you can see the reason why it's taking over. And in past sequences, the flus that, so I say, I don't know that much about the flu, but this is what I'm told by my epi people, is that there's a slow progression towards slightly less serious but more infective forms of the disease. And so that's what I'm hoping. And that's the hope.
Yeah, I mean, now what I will do is that in a couple of 3-4 days, I would put it as an opinion paper and send you as a co-author. And that's my promise, because that is really a good, only thing that I still need to understand that how this pandemic will convert into endemic. Just because it will spread fast, that part, can you just a little bit more?
Well, I'm always a little bit nervous about what the word pandemic means versus the word endemic means. Pandemic to me is sort of something that's globally spread everywhere. Endemic means it becomes part of the basic flora of a location, and so the spread of COVID was a pandemic. If it becomes part of our flora, it becomes endemic, and an endemic. Being endemic, that whatever the endemic thing is, it's not in that thing's best interest to be lethal. And I'm making. We understand what I mean. The world is driven by ecology. World is an ecosystem within ecosystems within ecosystems, and you can explain. And this goes back to the theoretical ecology stuff we were doing 20 years ago. Is I can go back. Use and provide you a reasonably intelligent explanation for something based on 3 or 4 principles from ecology. And that's the route, that's the direction where we are right now in our thinking, where we're turning back. And you can see it if you see some of the papers we've published in the last couple of years, as they're very ecological. Our AMR papers particularly, looking at the effect of predators, looking at the effect of competitors, looking at the effect of synergistic and mutualistic interactions with other bacteria. Looking at food web effects, as we think part of the reason why 2 incredibly credible places perform the same experiment and get different results because they're being driven by ecological factors rather than strict deterministic absolute mechanistic drivers like, say, an enzyme reaction or something like that. It's based on the complexity of ecology, and we can use the same principle to think about problems to do with the relative future of COVID that we have. Now, our worry is, and this is the big worry, and this is the thing we can never do, is that what happens if a mutation happens in a way that the viral, not just the transmissibility changes, but the infectivity does. And to the point, lethality. Now, there's a general drift away from that, but in a local level, if a transmissible form of the virus that's more lethal is selected, then you're going to have another hotspot and potential pandemic response. But then it'll subside again, so that you'll then slowly evolve back to ones that are less lethal. But this is just me thinking out loud.
Oh my God, you have gathered so much. I mean, please let me do the part 2 of it in someday, and then we will club this video, because if today we do not have, because the suggestion part we are not even touched, but we are so much into the subject, and that's what professor means. That's what I can. One thing I appreciate, and I was happy about it, that you said that a lot of people come up during the COVID-19, and this conversation would have not had this, of course, in COVID-19 and the certain work that we have done. But gradually what happened is that we need to, about the travel part of the AMR is also is always there. It is well described that perhaps you have written or that report that AMR also travels due to this global traveling part. And so this, of course, I don't want your answer here, just, and pandemic and endemic is also going to have this kind of circle. And this research is like that we don't know what is the start point, what is the end point. Probably in the cycle, we meet start points over and over again. And that's what happens in gradual research. Here, particularly that I wanted to ask or go forward is that somebody says that third wave should be the last wave. Or, well, I don't know, it sounds to me as a prayer, but does this fact has any connotation or any scientific ground that after third wave, perhaps the virus will complete their cycle and there will be no more further wave at least? Just a small answer on that.
Yeah, I actually, to be honest, I don't know. I don't see any rational reason why the third wave would be the last wave.
Me too. I mean, I agree with this opinion. Now, let's go to the suggestion part as much as we can cover because, yeah, I will send you that paper for sure. And maybe after that, I may request you that please come over for another episode. One thing that has come up very, you are my alignment or my similarity with you, and today I am proud of saying so, is that I am a chemistry graduate who did hydrogeology in their masters, and then somehow end up with diffuse in urban pollution monitoring in PhD. But during that of my interest, I was doing a lot of arsenic work and of course this hydrogeochemistry and that part. But I am a trained, I wanted to become a medical doctor. So I am very much thorough in biology, and I took a national eligibility test to become lecturer in life science. So I am certified that for that CON. And so somehow, and also by 2019, we already published some of the work on AMR, like, okay, Honda, and that group that I was the lead PI, and we wrote a project for Asia Pacific Network. And under that paper, under that program, all that AMR, and I was I knew that, okay, somewhere I want to be noticed by David Graham, but that is what I, so that is what I am going to write, because few things I wrote. One, seasonality effect. The second thing I wrote, that prevalence, and of course the increase of the AMR, those things that I really admire. I also wrote the correlation of the AMR with microplastic or heavy metals, because that was my forte, and I wanted to see the results in that context. So here, the point is that now in what you would like to advise a researcher that to do a good research, what will be your good advice?
Okay, well, there's probably 5 things, and they're relatively simple. First is you have to be technically good. In other words, you can be the most creative person in the world and have the greatest level of inspiration, but your reputation is based on the quality of what you do. And if you're wrong more often than right, then you lose credibility. So never publish anything until you're sure you're right. Now, I've published things that I know now were wrong, but at the time, I was really confident they're right. And in reality, they were right enough. And so be technically good. Second is be flexible. You never, as an academic, have complete control over what you're going to do next. And And so it's kind of funny, when I was first a professor at the University of Kansas, they had the people at the school take mentoring things with senior professors. But as it turned out, because I'd worked in industry for 10 years and I taught at a college, I really didn't need a lot of mentoring. And as it turned out, I was being quite successful quite quickly. So they actually turned me around and had me mentoring the other initial professors. And there was this one fellow who was so much smarter than I was, it was ridiculous. But he really just cared about combustion engines. Didn't care about anything else whatsoever. Now, he knew them like we could not imagine. And he literally would not think, even though other people in the world didn't care about combustion engines, not like he did, he refuses to change, and he got asked to leave 3 years later. So you've got to be flexible. You've got to have some broader goals, but then you've got to be willing to adapt, and you've got the same thing in your background. If an opportunity is presented to you and it's got an intellectual challenge, it's got some value to society, then you do it. You do it as long as you're able to do it and they find it interesting. So don't be too dogmatic about what you do, but if you do something, do it really well. I think the most common thing you probably hear is say no, because once you get to a certain point, everybody wants you to do everything. And I'm not very good at that. And I was terrible at that in the last 2 years. And I paid a personal price for that. But you've got to learn to say no. But getting back to this thing about being flexible, and it's I think possibly the most important thing is being enthusiastic and being passionate about what you do. If you're enthusiastic, people around you will somehow join your enthusiasm. Try and be as compassionate as it can be. Try and be as open as you can to people who are trying to work with you or gain from you or whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm a lightweight when it comes to how competitive I am as a person, but the bottom line is that enthusiasm matters. And especially if you want to have people jump on your bandwagon, if you're trying to be evangelistic about something. So, and I mean, I could list off other things. I mean, but I think the main ones are the ones I've said.
You have already told five points, right?
Yeah. So it's and I think that's pretty well it.
Yes. So why I was telling about the similarity or my subject, those things, or life science, or those, and you, hydrogeology, biogeochemistry, civil engineering, and that one. Because there was one argument happened during COVID-19 that, oh, you are opportunist biologist. I remember for Singapore and US, we were giving a talk, and Snyder, who is the editor-in-chief of ESNT Water, and also he was for Chemosphere, he told first that, look, I am an environmental chemist, but I have done work on this COVID, and that's why. So please, I am going to present that. But if on this level, if we say that, oh, why you are working, and I saw that many microbiologists or those things are becoming very protective, and they try to attack other people that, oh, how come you work on virus? You were not virologist before. I mean, this is
no.
I felt very bad. What is your take?
No. I think that's unfair. I mean, it depends upon. I suppose it depends upon why you did it. It's to the nature of your criticism. In my case, I had no intention on being a virologist. I now am by default a little bit, I'm not an expert. I know enough for practical purposes, and I sort of know who an expert is, though. So I've got enough pragmatism in me that I can find somebody who knows a lot more than I do, and then help translate what they know into something practically useful. But no, in this, I think most of the people, there are some people you deal with that are being clearly optimistic about the virus. And in fact, that's part of the reason why there's so many manuscripts that are complete garbage that are out there to do with COVID, is that people aren't necessarily, they're out there to try and make their name rather than to try and do the right thing. And so in our case, though, with AMR, it's just, an AMR, when I started doing AMR, most people weren't even born yet. But the bottom line is that it wasn't in any way opportunistic, and in reality.
No, so I mean, here I am not putting an allegation, I wanted a sort of, and you answered fairly well, that there is one aspect. One aspect is that a civil engineer who did PhD in hydrogeology can become somebody really who did contribute in AMR field, right?
Yes.
That we know as a David Graham. And the same thing, which means that at certain point, and my take on this is that that's why we give PhD, philosophy, doctorate in philosophy, that after that, the majors doesn't keep a lot of sense, or lot of, it doesn't remain relevant. If I finish on graduation, then I may remain a civil engineer. But if I still keep on studying, then I become a doctor the philosopher. Yeah. I become somebody who can work on by interest. Yeah. And there are several examples of that. So this kind of argument doesn't stand. If somebody say, if you are working, because I have done one work, I realized that AMR, because when I got a COVID, they gave me this much medicine. And that was the reason that I started working that, I have data of 2018. Can I have a data on now? And I will compare. And then I wrote about COVID-19 impact on antibiotic resistance. So that's the context.
Yeah, no, I think that I think your general comment is, as you get more experienced and you move up in the, basically as you gain more knowledge, part of the process of becoming that way is you're intrinsically inquisitive, and I like doing things that are new and different. I like solving new puzzles, but if you're a professor, you're right, it's a doctor of philosophy. I'll tell you a story that's a little bit embarrassing. I'm a professional engineer in Canada, and our university was pushing, for the sake of professional accreditation, that the professors in the university become accredited as professional engineers or chartered engineers in the UK. So about 3 years, maybe 2.5 years ago, this is 35 years after I was a professional engineer in Canada, and I'd long since I wasn't using it anymore. I decided I'd apply for chartership as an engineer, and I got rejected. And the reason why I was rejected was because they said I wasn't an engineer.
Oh.
They said you, and they said, well, you do biological innovation. You do. I've got patents on technologies we've designed. Basically, that's what I do. But the problem was that in an interview for this thing, it's only 2 hours. And I didn't list all the things that we did. But the problem there was, and this gets to the professor thing you said, is that the people who were examining me had such a dogmatic view of what an engineer was that I didn't fit into their box. But what I do is engineering. Everything I do is applied science. That's what engineering is. It's problem solving. If I want, I can design a wastewater treatment plant. I just don't happen to do it most of the time. I do other sorts of purely applied science projects, and that's I as it turned out, I complained quite loudly, and in fact I was given it. They brought in somebody who was quite senior, and they sort of overrode the original decision. But the bottom line was that being a professor is a bit of a problem sometimes, because you aren't necessarily one thing anymore. You're a chemist who's got a medical mentality, but also does hydrogeology or geochemistry or whatever. And I'm the same way. I mean, I think I told you that when I stopped being a baseball player, I was going to go to medical school. I had chosen to go into engineering because my brother did. And I figured, well, I'm not suited to being an engineer until I took my water course, in which case I decided to stay. But the bottom line is that people who get to where we are inquisitive. So if COVID arrives and somebody asks you to provide whatever knowledge you've got, it's solving another puzzle. And in fact, you find that. I think Richard Feynman, there's people in science that, they could pretty well do anything they want. Yeah. And if they're presented with a new puzzle, their ability is puzzle solving. And I think that's probably what makes some people stand out a little bit, is because they're flexible and they're more into trying to solve the puzzle rather than, and if it happens that they make a name for themselves, then that's a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing I have seen, like that interdisciplinarity is being celebrated, and we know that is what is going to bring the real solution. Because I can, and in many the Hollywood movie, we see that there is a problem, and then they go and pick up and ask a geologist to wake up, a microbiologist to wake up, and come to the meet and say that save the world. There is interdisciplinarity. There is somebody that, okay, we have to come together to solve a problem. But one person becomes interdisciplinarity in nature by within themselves. They say this is not fair. So I mean, that has a different take, and of course, but after a certain time, you have given very marvelous explained answer. Now the question about advice about PhD student. This is because my major audience are the PhD student. What do you advise that when one should do PhD? With whom they should choose? Whether institute is bigger or supervisor is bigger. They should go for a supervisor or they should go for a symbol or emblem. Why one should do PhD?
Okay. First, that's a good question. I'll try and be quick. First is most people shouldn't do a PhD. And you should do a PhD if you feel like you don't have any emotional choice. In other words, is it going to be a vocation? You don't do it for the credential, because a PhD requires too much effort. And so you basically, I advise people more often to not do PhDs. And it's because it's not going to get you what you think. So have a reason for doing it, and almost feel like you have to. You don't have any choice. Now, that's not true for everyone, because some people do want to use it as a stepping stone. But if you want to work for me, you probably won't work for me if that's your motivation. If I understand that beforehand, because I want to have people that are compelled and emotional about what they're doing. As to what you choose, where you choose, you basically go to the best place you can. But I think probably what makes more difference is the person who you work for and who you do your PhD with. And this is one of the things that I didn't mention when I was talking about general recommendations, is one of the other small realizations, and I mentioned Jerry Denoyles, the fellow who was the experimental ecologist. I didn't meet him when I first went to Kansas. I met him after a couple of years, and it was because the first couple of years I was working with people that just didn't really reciprocate. I worked hard, and other people, I didn't drive other people, but I didn't feel like I was on the same page with some people. And so the personal relationship you have between people and your collaborators, it's like marriages, and a marriage doesn't work if you don't have a great emotion for each other, and also you're on the same page. And so when it comes to a student choosing a professor, it's got to be a mutual relationship where you're both on the same page and you're driven by the same things. It doesn't mean that other options don't work, but for me, my most successful students have always been very, very good friends. And my best collaborators are always very good friends. And the reason why I'm still an associate or adjunct professor at the University of Kansas in geology is one of my closest collaborators is still there. And she and I have known each other now for many years. We completely trust each other. And it's those emotional relationships and connections that really matter. So my advice is go to the best university you can get into, but then be equally concerned about who you're working for, and because it may be that my style doesn't fit you. Who knows? We might be perfectly nice people,
yeah.
But it's you know, I tend to be a bit of a scattergun, and some people I drive crazy because I'm doing so many things at once that
yeah.
But on the other hand, the students have more difficulty with me are the ones that they want to have this and they want to have this and they want to have this.
Methodological.
If that's the way they are, I'm not the right person to be their advisor.
Yes.
And on the other hand, if somebody's extremely good mathematically and they're enthusiastic, and we both have a broader vision of a particular direction, I might consider that because I'm not very good at math. And so they might make me better, and vice versa, because I'm pretty good at other things. So it's I think for the student, it's make sure you're doing the PhD for the right reason, and then find and it's sort of partly also what your aspiration is in the future. If you want to become an academic, unfortunately, where you came from matters. May not like it that way, but it does. And it may not, it doesn't necessarily mean you're any better. It just means you've got a better credential, and you have to work a little harder to not come from Oxford or not come from,
no,
you know what I mean?
I got it, but Oxford is really top. I mean, I am talking about mortals.
So no, but I just use that as an extreme example. I mean, the thing is
I got it.
But the thing is this that you those good universities or the top universities are good, but they're not that much better. And there's individuals who are absolutely exceptional that are at universities you've never heard of before.
Yeah, so that is the crux of this question. I mean, that today, what happened is that, Professor Graham, I can tell you is that today you have made me to think to add one more opinion, one more section, that advice for advisors, advice for a PhD guide. What will be, so from the next time I am going to ask specifically to my guest, because when you said, you accepted yourself that, if somebody is working mode is such, I am not a right guide. You said that, so those aspect is also because sometimes we don't need to be, thinking too much about our way of training. Because my supervisor used to say, Professor Purmai, that look, PhD is a training, and to become a standalone researcher. Your education has been completed. Now it's time for training. And I am a senior. I am also researcher. You are also researcher. So there is nothing difference. Nowadays, I get a query. lot of time, that the student said that, sir, I really want to do PhD with you. And they might have real potential in them. But now I am always in catch-22 situation that whether I should advise them to come with me or I should not. So if you were me, what you would have advised?
If it's a student that is a self-driven person and motivated, I probably, if you felt they were doing it for the reasons that are similar to what you would do, I would consider saying yes. But then I would manage the number, because there's 2 points in my career where I've ended up with too many. And I haven't been able to serve the students very well. Now, I was lucky the last 5 years where I actually had 8 PhD students. I know that in an Indian university, that's actually low sometimes.
Yeah, low number.
but in a UK or North American university, that's too many. But I had 8 really good PhD students who now are professor this or doctor this or whatever, that they're all doing amazingly well. And it was just because they were very good. And so I think the very crux of everything is you've got to have fun.
Yeah,
it's got to be enjoyable. You've got to, when you meet that student and when that student meets you, is it somebody you're going to want to be with for the next 4 years or 5 years or something?
Wow, that is a great insight.
I've made mistakes. Luckily I don't make many mistakes of that sort anymore, but I've made the odd mistake and taken on the wrong student. And I should have used my intuition better when I first met them. And I wasn't right for them. We still got the PhD, or they still got their PhD, but it wasn't a very pleasant process at times. And I think I sort of changed in terms of the way I viewed things about 5 or 6 years ago. And that was that I wasn't going to have any students unless I liked them. In other words, if I didn't, and it wasn't, and I hope they had a high regard for me as well. I mean, I don't know. You don't necessarily get along with every student equally, but the bottom line is it's got to be somebody you can be with. And
sometimes I don't know whether you have been ditched by any PhD student or not, but sometimes they use you, they get the degree, and then they ditch you.
Yep. No. It happens sometimes, and as you go along, you learn your lessons a little bit, but nobody learns everything, and it happens again. You think you say, you say that's I'm never going to do that again, and then it happens again. No. and so you just got. But this is where I think this is on personal advice. Is that's where you've got to rely on your gut and your intuition. And I very, very strongly believe in intuition, and it's not magic. Intuition is something that's not an ethereal thing that comes down upon you.
I feel that is soul. That is your own soul that is telling you.
Yeah, well, I think I think intuition is the accumulation of everything you've ever experienced.
Yes,
and you know, and what makes you feel good are things that have made you feel good in the past. And if you've got somebody who's got a kind soul, or a generous person, or an enthusiastic person, you don't necessarily have to be with them very long to get the feeling. And when I've made the mistakes relative to either a collaborator or accepting a project or choosing a master's or PhD student, it's always been when my intuition told me not to, and I did it anyway. and it was mostly because the person was very smart.
And then you end up with being happy, or end up with being wrong?
I'd much prefer to be happy.
No. My question is that whenever your intuition says, or have raised the question, still you go on ahead with that. So most of the time, what was the outcome? Positive or negative? Don't say anything else.
Oh, when I've gone against my intuition, it's wrong 75% of the time. And what I've learned, what I've learned is that believe your intuition, and you don't know why it's there. It could be hormones. Who knows? There's something.
No, there is something. I think
there's something. There's something, and I've got 2 or 3. Well, I've maybe probably I haven't had as many PhD students as some people in my situation, just because I'm quite particular about who I have. But I was going to say is there's 4 or 5 PhD of my ex-PhD students who are very good friends. You know, they're now off as professor of this or whatever. But they're more.
Yeah, please go ahead.
They're more friends than they're friends and colleagues, and they happen to be my PhD student at some point in our collective past. But we would.
I think a PhD student, nobody can be more better collaborator than your PhD student. I mean, if I say look downward, because but when I think as a PhD student, I feel that nobody is there more worth to make please is my supervisor. Like today itself, I put a LinkedIn post where my supervisor is my co-author of the paper, and that project I told him that please let's requested him over and over again, let's write a project together so that I can write with you, and so on and so forth. So this is I mean, great thing that I mean, so many things were hidden, or I don't know, that the life has given you so much lesson. I don't know, and so much wisdom is there. I mean, not many people can articulate the way you are articulating. I can tell you, Professor Graham. I start calling you. Actually, I thought I will entire interview I will say David, but the point is that your wisdom made me think. Asking you to Professor Graham is that. So here is the 2 more things. Is that what is your advice to be a good teacher?
Oh, enthusiasm and organization. That's it. You've got to be enthusiastic and you've got to be organized. And so that's, you have to, teaching is hard work.
Yeah.
But the hard work is getting the class organized. And once the class is organized and structured, then it becomes theater.
Yes, I like that word, theater,
and so you try and entertain, you try and motivate. The teacher, no student has learned based on something I've told them. What they've learned is because I've motivated them, and they've learned themselves. And I think that's the key in teaching is being as motivating as you can. And in classes that I teach, that I obviously I'm kind of enthusiastic, so but I had classes not work, and I've never completely understood why. But maybe I didn't have the same, I was having a bad term or whatever, and the same motivation wasn't coming out as would normally be the case, or I'm distracted and I'm not giving them enough time. That sort of thing happens. But I think the truth is enthusiasm and just organization, because the weaker students need organization. You have to plan things out a bit more because they're not going to connect the dots as much. The stronger students will be stimulated by the motivation. All the students will be, but the strong ones, it might make them to be motivated more. And it's pretty simple. I think, and it's hard work. It's the hardest thing I do, the teaching.
My sensei, sensei means teacher in Japanese, is that I did my PhD from the University of Tokyo. So there, when I was coming back to India to join my faculty position, I asked him, give me some advice for being a good teacher. He said, don't try too hard. I was like, so I mean, this is about about in the advice category is how to be a good administrator, because in both ways, because I don't want it to be, because to be very, very honest, now I'm in the administrator position because I am heading 2 departments and all that. When we become this side of the table, we always become very harsh. And when we remain that side of the table, we expect that some kindness should be given. There has to be a strike and balance. So what I want to extract here is that administrator who select or recruit new faculties, administrator who has been reported for some mishandling or something, or some report has been given, how they handle it. As an administrator who wants to take another chance. One more, I mean, everybody deserves, it says that everybody deserves second chance. So what you would like to say, and how was you as an administration? How were you?
I'm not super organized. I don't like administrating. The part of my job I like the most is solving the puzzles in research. So
you've been to you're head of the department at Newcastle?
No, I'm not. I've been asked
several times,
but I turned it down. I'm not, I think I think I don't like doing any administration I don't have to. And
wow.
And so I will do what I must. And so I tend to the other thing is that I've learned that other people are more organized than I am. So you hire smart, organized people, so that I can go out and freewheel. And I understand, and I hire people I trust that are very organized, and they can help me with the details that I tend to be sloppy with. So when it comes to administration, I think you asked a question a while ago about the COVID situation. That's one of the problems we've had I think many people have had at other universities is the administration side of our job has become really difficult. Is that there's so many things that are being placed back on our shoulders that our time is being taken inordinately on administrative issues. And in fact, especially now at my point in my career, I'm sort of seeing, I'm not going to be doing it that much longer, regardless of my plan on retiring or not. But I don't want to waste my time doing administration. When I've got all these great intellectual puzzles. I mean, we just discovered a new method for separating RNA out of wastewater. So why would I want to manage things when I could be spending my time improving the efficiency of the recovery of RNA viruses from wastewater? I mean, it's so much more valuable to society. And even if we're wrong, if we make some discoveries along the way, it's got value. And I think universities are very they become very, very business driven, and in fact they're using academics who are good at what they've done to be administrators.
And they spoil it.
It's just basically a bad business decision. Why would you have
a great researcher?
I'll give you my really what I think is a good example. I knew a guy I haven't seen him for many years, but his name's John Lipscomb. He was a professor of biochemistry at the University of Minnesota. His dad, John, was an incredibly talented biochemist. His dad won the Nobel Prize, and so he had good genes. And John, but John's problem is John was really competent, and he was very systematic, and his college was really having trouble because it was really not functioning very well. And the president of the university asked him as a favor to become the the senior admin person for the School of Biochemistry. And he said he didn't get a thing done for 3 years. Now, John had the unfortunate thing of being talented at anything he did. But you cannot tell me taking somebody like John out of working on biochemistry of receptor sites for an infectious agent is worth losing 3 years of John's brain at that for the sake of organizing something in a university is going to be in everyone's best interest. And that's how I feel about the way academics are treated, is that they move up the system, and then it's the Peter principle. You rise to your level of incompetence. So why would you take somebody who's an incredibly competent researcher and put them into something they're terrible at? You're paying somebody, say you're paying somebody who's probably overpaid to do something they're not very good at. So you touched upon one of my ranting points.
No, I am very good at, if you will, if you will see our seasoned scholar, of course you cannot find time. Moving ahead, Professor Graham, is that this academician role, and any question that I put to you, this is my second season, and your answer mesmerizes me. So one thing I want to just tell you that please keep on on this esteem. Don't now. What happens is that I have already asked about administrator, PhD, and teacher. Anything else that has been left, because today you made me to think that there should be some question asking how to be a good supervisor. So now I in the boundary, and this is the last question of the segment B. Segment C is very small, where I will ask you just about your liking and all those things, and very quickly, rapid fire. So here it is about last question is that, do you have still any advice for any sake, for any matter?
Nothing that I haven't said. I mean, I think that the going back to one thing I said before is that you, in whether you're in academia or anything, you've got to basically enjoy what you do, and you've got to try and have fun, and a lot of that is related to working with people that you like, and that there's synergism relative to the interactions, and that's pretty well it.
So here there is a two aspect. One is that networking. You can tell some advice on networking, how to have because so many countries, I could not even read out. I thought it would be 5 minutes more if I will tell that. So how do you think network is important? One thing. How, if networking is important, how to have it, and then how to maintain it? Because clicking is one thing, but maintaining is different.
Well, what I've done is I tend to be kind of adventurous, and if I find I like doing things that are new, and I like going to places that are different, and so if somebody from Nicaragua has got a problem to do with their water, or Kerala, or if then, and it's something that I find intellectually interesting, at least I'll enter that conversation. So once it's sort of like a mating process that, people come to me all the time from literally all over the world. And sometimes something happens and sometimes it doesn't. Occasionally though, it does. And it does with somebody you like, and they like you. That leads you to meeting other people, and you start creating a network of people based on really is more like friendship rather than you might have met for another reason, but it's sustained. So when it comes to a network, there's people that I worked with for 10 years that I haven't seen for 10 years. And if that happens, it's more than likely circumstance, bad luck, or it's because the relationship wasn't that close in the first place. So I've got some very good friends literally around the world. And my network is my friends. And they're people that I trust. I like trusting the people I work with. And that's probably one of the things that the chinks in my armor is that if somebody does something dishonorable related to me or people that are close to me, that matters. Unfortunately, I won't get even or anything like that, but I'll remember. And so it's that collegial trust that becomes important. So how to network? Go to meetings. If you're young, go to meetings and meet people. Try and be as social as you can. I'm actually kind of introverted myself. And I
can't believe it.
No, I find going to professional meetings really difficult. I don't go to them very often.
So introvert means in life, I mean, you don't want to talk much or those things, or so that's what I am saying. That for me, I feel you speak your heart whenever it is needed. Of course, you will not speak out of turn, but you will speak whenever it is there in the fullest. And yeah. So, and you are Aries, who loves water.
What I mean by introvert is that I don't like doing things that are trivial.
No.
And I interact. I don't like having meaningless conversations. And so I'm sort of a bit of a geek in the sense that I when I'm in a social environment and you've got people in cocktail dresses and tuxedos with martini glasses, that's just not my world, unless I'm talking about ecological theory.
Great.
And so I don't feel comfortable with those types of things. And often when I go to professional meetings, unless I've got a nest of people that are good friends, I tend to be very unsocial.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably been one of the weaknesses in my influences. That
no, but
is that I'm not somebody, but that doesn't mean you've got to go to meetings, because what you've got, in retrospect, if there was something I would do differently now, if it's 30 to 35 years later, I would have been a bit more social when I was younger. Because I now know.
You were telling about, I'm sorry that today I realized that interrupting is not a power, but it is harmful. So I was talking about, you were talking about three aspects. You said that, so networking is important. How to do it? Go to the meeting. Now you have to say how to maintain it.
Maintaining it is just through friendship. In other words,
no, but how often we need to contact? It means I have a deep love for you, but I will not find time to write you an email for 2 years.
I know that there's people in my close intellectual inner circle that if I saw my colleague in Kansas, for example, and we sat down to talk, we would continue the conversation that we had started 5 years ago.
Wow.
In other words, I don't see her that much anymore. But part of the reason why we work so well together is because we are very much on the same page. And I've got 2 colleagues in China that are like that. I've got a couple in the US. I've got one in Israel, a couple in India.
So how does it feel to talk the 5 years conversation now again? How does it feel?
Oh no, it's just I mean, the network, if there's a real relationship, then the time doesn't really matter very much.
So here is one critical question, is that how much time do you think that it takes to make a friend? Let's talk about, I am very junior, and of course I want to be a friend of yours, and so generally how much time you need to make somebody like, okay, he or she can be in the inner circle?
It can be either it can be instant, and it can be gradual.
Yeah, based on
the consistency.
It just depends. I mean, I've got a couple of people that I've only been working with a few years, but like we've known each other for 20 years.
Yeah, so I mean, I do understand, I do agree that, and I do want to tell my audience is that maintaining the networking is very easy if you have a friendship with them. If you want to have them for the outcome and give and take basis, then that network may collapse because somebody else will be there who can give more and take less. Or take
and in fact that happens. I mean, the thing is that I think the weakness of working with me right now is because I'm so busy with so many different things. I'm not as good a collaborator as I used to be because I just simply don't have time. And it's not due to disrespect, it's just it's sometimes you end up having to deal with what's right in front of you and you don't have much choice. So, and in fact, there was a project that some colleagues at UCL wanted me to be involved in, looking at AMR transmission through refugees in Latin America. And I thought this was a fabulous project. I mean, I thought it was a really cool idea. And we danced around the possibility of doing this because they had wanted me to run the project and be the PI, but I didn't want to do that because it was going to be too much responsibility. However, I really wanted to do the project, but eventually they just got frustrated because I wouldn't want to run it, and they eventually found somebody else. And I just have to, I sort of kicked myself on one level, but I really would have liked to have done it, but that relationship has faded away. Maybe it'll appear again, I don't know. But you have to, this is the whole thing of having to be able to say no sometimes and accept the consequences of it. Yeah. And so you can't have everything.
I mean, the one of the things that I am appreciating much, because maybe you are British or Canadian or whatever, but your English is so nice and you can articulate your feelings so well, that you always provide an example with your, and that makes it awesome.
That's the teacher in me.
Yeah, but of course I have seen that feeling is there, passion is there, but articulating is another art. And you said that you are a preferably good teacher and writer. Next thing that I was about to ask is that publication part. You already said don't publish too many, but I will not ask you so many smaller questions. I want your views on publication, which include whether impact factor is important, what about the citations, how to target a good journal, how to bear the rejection, and of course, this is one part as an author. So advice to the author, and you can answer in two segments, advice to the author and advice to the editor. Editor or somebody who evaluates, editor or reviewer. So how do you behave in the role of editor and reviewer, and what is your advice for the people who publish?
Well, I'll talk about editor first. I didn't really I thought I was moderately good at, I think, being an editor, but I didn't really like it very much. I found it took quite a bit more time than I had to do it, and I would prefer to be doing other things. I also had trouble being an editor in the sense that you've got to be kind of brutal sometimes. You've got to turn things down, but you got to do it in a nice way. And I tended to be a bit more generous than my gut feeling was relative to the quality of things. And so I don't think I was a terribly good editor at a journal. I do think, though, as an editor of a consortia of activity where there's multiple people working together, I think I'm fairly good at that. Relative to being an author, I think what I said at some point earlier is quality is first. But after a while, you start getting a good gut feeling of what quality actually is. And you also get a bit of an intuitive sense of how good something is relative to the journals out there. Impact factor isn't everything. Unfortunately, it's become too much of a thing relative to authors trying to target places. One thing I have noticed in the last year and a half is it's harder to get good stuff published. There's tons of journals, but we've submitted what I thought was work of pretty high quality to journals that I thought were pretty good, and they've been turned down, and they wouldn't have been turned down 3 years ago or 6 years ago. So it's become more intensely competitive getting published, especially in the better journals. And so I think nobody's infallible relative to the process of publishing. I think the big thing, though, is that you try and make the story as clear as possible to somebody who's expert but not super expert. And if you make the story clear enough, you can probably get stuff published at a higher place than maybe the work deserves. Part, though, really is the quality of how you've designed the research. If there's a logic and symmetry to the work, then it's much easier to publish that. So it's sort of part of the package, but I don't really have any sage-like advice. It's advice. It's often when we've got a piece of information that we think is a nice package, we'll choose the wrong journal. So it's not, there's nothing, there's some journals I've got a pretty negative impression of because I think they've got unfair editing. Other ones I've got very positive impression of because I think the editing is fair. So if I get rejected for the right reasons, I don't mind getting rejected. If I get
rejected, it means, do you think editorial board means a lot for you? Do you think editorial board means a lot for you?
For me, I'm on the editorial board for ES&T, and I don't, but I'm not a practicing editor, and so I enjoy that role, trying to help with the direction of the journal, but I don't want to be an editor anymore. I never was at ES&T, but I don't want to be an editor anymore. It's just, it's sort of like.
Tell me about that. How was it? Because I don't know whether in my life I can experience it or not, because I cannot see even tomorrow how it is going to unfold, and whether or not I will survive tomorrow. But how does it test to publish science paper? Were you a first author?
Oh, I was actually a second author. I was the corresponding author. And
oh my God, that is more than the first author.
Yeah. No, it was a discovery that I made when I was a PhD student. But I couldn't finish. What I discovered was a new class of molecules during my PhD. And
new class of molecule altogether?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
That there, people have known about siderophores, which are these iron sequestering molecules bacteria produce. So they excrete these molecules into the environment, and because iron is often insoluble in the environment, and it's an essential nutrient. Some bacteria are capable of excreting these molecules into their environment, and what it functionally does is it dissolves, sequesters, and then internalizes the iron. It's sort of like a fishing rod with a hook, but they collect iron. People have known about these molecules for probably 60 or 70 years. And when I was working with methanotrophs in the late 80s, early 90s, I discovered that methanotrophs seem to do something similar to what that iron organisms do, but they do it for copper. And so the last chapter of my PhD thesis in 1992 was talking about this mythical molecule that must exist, that was, we called them chalcophores. So the siderophores was the Latin word for iron. Chalcophores is the Latin word for copper. So I was sure these molecules were producing something that was specific for copper. Initially, we thought it was a misappropriated iron sequestering molecule. As it turned out, it was a copper molecule. The problem was that we couldn't get its crystal structure. And we couldn't get it pure enough to get crystals. And so I worked on this as my hobby for about 6 years after I did my PhD, and I still couldn't get the structure. So he never published it. And about 1998, 99, this is 6 years after I graduated, I got a master's student whose undergraduate degree was in biochemistry, but he felt biochemists just did things for the sake of doing them and didn't do things for real practical value. And so what we were looking at was trying to see how these methanotrophs could be used for bioremediation and also their role relative to greenhouse gas suppression. So he liked doing biochemistry for that. And so he went back to the very beginning of what I was doing as a student and did his PhD on purifying the molecules that I thought existed. And he succeeded. He got crystals, we got a structure, we got their mechanism, and the molecule, the first one was called methanobactin, and it's now a class of molecules that's known across science. And so we discovered the first chalcophores, and the first and most well-known one is one called methanobactin, but now there's hundreds of methanobactins because they found them being produced. Because part of the reason why people didn't know they existed, hadn't studied them, was because nobody knew they existed. And the reason why I suspected they were there was because methanotrophic bacteria are very unusual because they're trying to oxidize a very reduced molecule, which is methane, CH4. They had to have something that was extremely strong catalyst to break down the CH4 structure. So basically what a methanotroph does is they oxidize methane and convert it to methanol. The problem is, to have an enzyme to do that, it's got to have a very, very powerful active site. And the active site of the most powerful type of oxygenase that breaks down methane is got copper in it. So I figured that, but copper is also really toxic. So there had to be some sort of shuttling system that allowed the organisms to get copper and then shield their internals from getting damaged by the fact that free copper is there. But it's also got to then be inserted into the protein to allow the oxygenase to function. And so what I did on my PhD was basically look at the shuttling system. So I looked at the kinetics of all the different phenomena. Then we looked at the ecological consequences of a molecule like it, but I could never prove the molecule existed. And for many years, people didn't believe it. I talked about it at meetings. I published it in a couple of credible journals, but most people didn't think, they thought it was just nonsense. But then when Young Kim, who's now a professor at the University of Washington, my PhD student at the time, he started again, and he and a cytochrome biochemist found the trick. They found the reason why I'd spent 10 years failing.
Wow.
And it was because that protein chemists have very particular ways in which they extract and recover proteins. The problem was that methanobactin, the molecule, was held. I'm getting into biochemistry detail, but the structure was held together by sulfide bridges. But sulfide bridges are really pH sensitive, and so the standard way you recover a protein is acidify it. And everybody who does protein work usually acidifies to start it. And what we discovered was acidifying this molecule caused it to denature, which is atypical. And then it's a small molecule. And so what Young did was he went back to the very beginning, and he and the other fellow, whose name was David Alterman, together came up with a way of getting the protein recovered without denaturing. And it was a moderate pH, and they played around with a couple of other agents. But the bottom line was that as soon as I remember the moment when Young came in with this great stack of printouts relative to the crystal structure. And he said, I got it. I said, well,
at that time you were at Kansas University?
Yeah, it was when I was in Kansas. And I said, well, you just got your name on a paper in Science. And
you told.
I said that
without even getting results, or
I just told him you just got a paper in Science, and we had a paper in Science 3 months later. So,
I mean, I loved it. I want to thank myself also to ask you that question, because it was. Now I want to know a little bit more about Professor Graham. No, I want to know more about David. And so just answer very quickly. So what do you think about the science that interests you? Or, I mean, what do you do when things are not going as per you? As per your expectation.
Yeah,
how do you manage frustration?
Unfortunately, at this point, when I was younger, I would go golfing.
So,
but now I tend to internalize things a lot, which isn't very healthy.
What is your 3 strengths?
Pardon?
Your 3 strengths.
Strengths. I can be really focused. I think 2 or 3 steps beyond what I'm doing. I'm not interested in being the same. I want to be different, and I want to be the future rather than the present.
Good.
And I'm enthusiastic.
Yeah, that word I will put on your video.
Yeah.
What is that you are not good at?
I'm not very organized.
What do you mean by organized?
I hate paperwork. And so sometimes when I'm managing projects, I'm not very good at keeping track of the finances.
I understand
that sort of thing. I can be kind of temperamental. In other words, I get frustrated when I'm dealing with bureaucracy. And
How many children do you have?
Or narrow-mindedness, really. I mean, I think one of my other strengths is that I can change my mind. I can admit I'm wrong, and I'm willing to try new things. And people who are dogmatic, who have got what they believe, and what they believe means more than the truth, that really drives me crazy. And I really am. That does make me angry and frustrated. Is narrow-mindedness, and so. But I can come up with a whole bunch of other negative things.
Just one point is that how many children do you have?
2. One's I've still got a daughter that's 26. She's in graduate school at the University of London in a human ecology, and my son is a graphic designer that works in London but almost all of his work's in Copenhagen in Denmark because he's a specialist in Danish design.
Any bucket list? Still you want to do something?
Well, there's a couple of things I won't tell you.
Great answer, great answer.
Because I don't want to jinx myself. No, my bucket list is I don't really. I mean, I would like to go back to the Arctic one more time. I would like to spend a more extended period living in India.
Wow.
I will fulfill very soon. I would like to be able to spend more extended periods of time in Vancouver, where my family, my previous nuclear family is. And but I mean, there are professional things, but those are the things that those are things that happen based.
Okay.
Those are things they're professional things, but there's more things to do with being organic, and you can't really control them.
Who is the most favorite author?
John Steinbeck.
Most favorite book?
The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe.
Wow. Best favorite actor? She and he.
That's a tough call.
You can name two.
I'm trying. Steve McQueen from way back when.
Yeah.
And I do like Daniel Craig.
I also like Daniel Craig, but I can tell you that I didn't expect that. I thought much older and not Daniel Craig. Yeah, but I love him, especially in James Bond movie. Your best movie, your favorite movie. You can say up to 2 or 3.
No, that's a tough one. I like the Hunger Games movies. I like the Lord of the Ring movies. I think they're brilliant. And possibly my favorite single movie is, I like Harry Potter as well. But the thing is The Great Escape.
Which one?
The Great Escape. It's from 1963, and it's got Steve McQueen in it.
I am going to watch
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But what you'll see if you watch the different movies, you'll see that they're all functionally the same story, but different contexts. I like heroes. I like heroes, and
you yourself is a hero.
Yeah.
Tell me the most cherished trip in the past.
Pardon?
Most cherished or most memorable trip in the past.
Trip. Oh, that's a tough one.
Indian.
I've been very lucky. I've had the chance to do some pretty amazing things. The second time I went to Svalbard, the first time we went up the Ganges, I swam up a river in Hawaii to Waialua Falls. I did some things. I did skydiving. I did a lot of.
You really love water. I can tell you.
I went. I did a sabbatical in Israel, and I loved it there. So I've some very good friends there. But I think that Svalbard, the Ganges, and
any trip that you want to take, someplace you still want. Antarctica, I don't want to listen. But anything that any trip, maybe my home.
Okay, this is a
no. I mean, there's some trips that given my age, I'd like to be able to go back to a few places that I was able to travel to quite regularly that I can't anymore. And I would, to be honest, I'd like to I've never been to Southern India, and I'd like to go to Southern India. And
I will take that responsibility. I would go to the next question is that, what is your favorite quote or mantra of life?
Quote. It's amazing how successful someone is if they work hard.
Is it quote? By whom? By you?
My dad.
Tell me once again.
My father.
Yeah. So tell me, what was the quote?
It is amazing how successful you are if you work hard.
If you were, it's amazing.
And there's another word. Actually, I misquoted myself. It's amazing how lucky you are if you work hard. In other words, if you're successful, it's usually not luck, because you've worked hard.
Oh, that's the crux. I don't want to ask you anymore further. Of course, I wanted to ask what is your favorite food and what is your favorite restaurant. If you want to answer, it is fine. Otherwise, this is the backup. Because
no, I mean, I'm going to be, well, I'm already in the dark. So, but no, my favorite restaurants is a restaurant called Minadito, which is a Mexican restaurant in southern Tucson in Arizona. Wow. It's fabulous. And my favorite food is a tough call because I love food.
Sometimes you like this. Oh,
yeah. And one of the things I really like about India is I love the food there. But I've also had outstanding food in Israel. I've had outstanding food in Cuba. I've had outstanding food.
Cuban food is another level.
I love spicy food. I like food with spice. So obviously I like Indian food, and I like Latin American flavors. And so yes,
this is really the last question. What you would have been if you were not a researcher or scientist or professor?
Probably an author.
Author of fictional book or Harry Potter?
Fiction.
Maybe.
Fiction. Yeah, I've written short stories for children, and I think I'm a fairly good storyteller.
Yeah,
I read a great deal, but I don't read. I read probably more fiction than technical stuff.
Great. And here I want to tell thank you so very much.
Thank you for asking me, and certainly we've got to be in touch in the future.